Everyone in Dean Corll's Houston neighborhood perceived him as a decent common man. He was well liked by many of the young people in the neighborhood, and was well known for spending most of his time at the little candy factory his mother ran. Even local schoolchildren received free candy from him, earning him the moniker Candyman. Dean Corll was a serial murderer who killed at least 28 young men and boys in the early 1970s, but he also had a sinister side to him hidden beneath his innocent grin. Later, the Houston mass murders would be the name given to this horrifying crime wave. And the reality was kept hidden until Corll's passing in 1973. Surprisingly, the teenager he had trained to assist him in his murderous rampage was the one who killed Corll, his own accomplice. Welcome to True Stories. Join the family in exploring some of the most twisted true crime cases. As always, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. Now, let's get into it. The idea that a serial killer's depravity can be linked to some form of horrifying childhood incident is a common cliché in true crime literature. But given what is known about Corll's early life, it is challenging to identify such a specific event. In Fort Wayne, Indiana, Dean Corll was born in 1939. His parents apparently fought frequently, and never had a pleasant marriage. Nobody, however, seems to have noticed anything particularly peculiar about these fights. Furthermore, Corll's father had a reputation for being a tough disciplinarian. However, it is uncertain whether this ever resulted in mistreatment or harsher penalties than those that were customary in the 1940s. Corll's mom adored him in the meantime. His parents originally got divorced in 1946, had a brief reconciliation, and then remarried. But following their second divorce, his mother decided to spend some time exploring the South. The family subsequently relocated to Vidor, Texas, after she remarried a traveling salesman. Corll was said to have been a quiet, well-behaved boy in school. His grades were reportedly good enough to go unnoticed, and he occasionally dated students or local girls. What led this ordinary American youngster from the 1950s to his transformation into the Candyman serial killer of the 1970s? Strangely, his mother's confectionery company seems to have been the link between these two tales. Dean Corll's mother and stepfather founded Pecan Prince Candy Company in the middle of the 1950s, initially operating out of the family garage. Corll was a key player in the business from the start. Corll and his younger brother ran the machinery that made the candy, while his stepfather sold it on his sales route, and his mother ran the business end of the operation. Corll had spent several years working at the candy store by the time his mother got a divorce from her second husband. Corll eventually made a quick trip back to Indiana to take care of his grandmother, who was widowed. However, by 1962, he was prepared to return to Texas and support his mother in a new business. The Corll Candy Company, renamed after Corll's mother, was established in the Houston Heights neighborhood. Dean Corll was designated vice president, and his younger brother was designated secretary and treasurer. Despite being drafted into the American Army in 1964 and serving for only around 10 months, Corll was able to obtain a hardship discharge by arguing that he had to assist his mother at her place of business. Corll continued to work at the confectionery shop for several more years. Corll's engagement with the business, however, was not as honorable as it seemed. There were indicators that he was drawn to young boys. One young teenage kid who worked there allegedly reported to Corll's mother that Corll had made moves toward him sexually in the book The Man with Candy. Corll's mother then expelled the youngster. Meanwhile, numerous adolescent guys appeared to be drawn to the candy factory itself, both as customers and employees. They included some runaways and troublesome youngsters. Dean Corll rapidly established a connection with these teenagers. Corll even set up a pool table in the back of the factory, where workers and their friends, many of whom were also young teenage males, could gather during the day. According to reports, Corll was flirtatious with the young people, and made friends with a lot of them. David Brooks, a 12-year-old boy, was one of them. Like many kids, he was introduced to Corll by being offered candy and a place to hang out. However, over the course of 2 years, Corll cultivated Brooks and gradually earned his trust. By the time Brooks was 14 years old, Corll was frequently abusing him sexually, and paying him with presents and money to be quiet. In addition to abusing Brooks, Dean Corll was searching for additional victims of rape and murder. Texas Monthly claims that Corll killed his first victim, who was documented in September 1970. By this time, Corll's mother had gone to Colorado after divorcing her third husband. However, Corll remained in Houston, since he had secured a new position as an electrician. Corll, who was now in his early 30s, had also relocated to a new apartment. He would, however, go quickly. He routinely shifted between rent houses and flats throughout his criminal spree, staying in one place for only a few weeks at a time. Jeffrey Conan, an 18-year-old student hitchhiking from Austin to Houston, was his first known victim. Corll probably offered to drive Conan to his girlfriend's house because he thought he was trying to get there. Dean Corll kidnapped two adolescent guys and tied them to his bed in his house in December, just a few months later. When Brooks entered the room unexpectedly, he was in the middle of abusing them sexually. At first, Corll claimed to be a member of a gay pornographic ring that had sent the teenagers to California. But afterwards, he admitted to killing them to Brooks. Corll gave Brooks a Corvette in exchange for his silence. In addition, he gave Brooks a $200 reward for any boy he brought to him. Brooks seems to concur as well. Elmer Wayne Henley was one of the boys Brooks brought to Corll. However, Corll chose not to murder him for whatever reason. As he had done with Brooks, he instead lured Henley into his evil plan by feeding him the same lie about the porn ring before telling him the reality, and offered him money in exchange for his assistance in locating fresh victims. Dean told me he would pay me $200 for every boy I could bring in, and maybe more, if they were extremely good-looking boys, Dean told me, Henley later recalled. Corll only gave the youngsters $5 or $10 on average. Henley has stated that the financial crisis facing his family is the only reason he accepted the offer. But he didn't back out, even after he received far less money than he had anticipated. Strangely, he appeared to be almost flattered to be mentioned. Together, Brooks and Henley would aid the Candyman killer in kidnapping adolescents and young men between the ages of 13 and 20 in the early 1970s. The three frequently utilized candy, drink, or narcotics to get the lads inside Corll's Plymouth GTX muscle car or his white van. The lads were taken to Dean Corll's house, where the perpetrators handcuffed and gagged the victims. In a horrifying way, Corll occasionally made them send their families postcards to let them know they were okay. Each victim was violently assaulted after being strapped to a wooden torture board. After then, some victims were shot to death, while others were strangled to death. Every boy returned to Corll was slain, and Brooks and Henley took part in these acts directly. Even though Dean Corll sought weak young people into Trisk, many of his victims had loving parents who were actively looking for them. Mark Scott, one of Corll's victims, was 17 years old when he vanished on April 20, 1972. After frantically calling his classmates, friends, and neighbors to find out what had occurred, his parents hastily filed a missing persons report. The Scott family got a postcard a few days later that was purportedly written by Mark. The letter stated that everything was well with him, and that he had obtained a job in Austin that paid $3 an hour. The Scotts didn't think their son would abruptly leave town without bidding them farewell. They realized right away that there was a serious problem. However, they didn't get any assistance from the Houston Police Department after their boys went missing, similar to many of Dean Corll's victims' families. According to the New York Daily News, a distraught father named Everett Waldrop revealed to reporters that when his sons first went missing, "I camped on that police department door for 8 months. The only thing they did was ask, 'Why are you down here? You are aware that your lads have fled.'" Sadly, Corll killed both of his sons, 15-year-old Donald and 13-year-old Jerry. The chief of the Houston Police Department asserted that there was little the government could do to assist distressed families, because in Texas in the early 1970s, it was not unlawful for a child to run away from home. In the first election held after Corll's killings came to light, that chief would later be ousted from his position. On August 8, 1973, Dean Corll turned on Elmer Wayne Henley after nearly 3 years and 28 recorded murders. Henley had invited Tim Curley and Rhonda Williams, 2 teenagers, to Corll's house that day. Williams was the only known victim of the killing spree, but Henley later swore he had no intention of harming either Curley or her. Instead, it was said that they were all there to party. The group consumed a lot of alcohol and inhaled paint to get high before everyone went to sleep. Henley found himself tied up with Curley and Williams when he opened his eyes. Henley was being yelled at by Corll, who was brandishing a .22 caliber revolver and yelling, "I'm going to murder you, but first I'll have my fun." Corll then carried Henley into the kitchen to express his rage at Henley for inviting a female over. In response, Henley begged Corll to release him, claiming that the two of them could kill Curley and Williams simultaneously. Henley was eventually released from his bonds, and Corll then took Curley and Williams into the bedroom and bound them to the torture board. Corll needed to put his rifle down to accomplish this. At that point, Henley decided to take the weapon and put an end to the crime wave once and for all. Williams, who was there throughout the assault, but did not publicly discuss it until 2013, described how Henley had been shocked by Corll's actions. According to her, as quoted by ABC 13, "He stood at my feet, and just all of a sudden told Dean this couldn't keep going on. He couldn't let him keep killing his friends, and that it had to stop." Dean widened his eyes and expressed amazement. "You're not going to do anything to me," he said as he started to stand up without saying another word. Henley then fatally shot Corll 6 times with the gun. The Houston mass murders were finally over with that. Henley immediately called the police to confess to killing Dean Corll. He and Brooks eventually came clean about their role in the crimes and promised to take investigators to the graves of the victims. Brothers, however, denied having a direct hand in the killings. According to CBS News, within a week, authorities discovered 17 dead in makeshift graves and a boathouse shed. Then, 10 more victims were discovered in the nearby woods and on High Island Beach. The 28th victim's remains weren't discovered by police until 1983. And regrettably, Henley and Brooks were unaware of any other deaths that Dean Corll may have committed. Henley was ultimately found guilty of 6 murders and given 6 life terms for his involvement in the killings. Brooks was given a life sentence in addition to being found guilty of 1 murder. We've come to the end. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe. Till next time.